Okay, this is Wheelock's Latin chapter 17. We will be looking at relative pronouns in this chapter. And relative pronouns are something that you probably have learned in your English grammar already, but let's take a look at the definition of a relative pronoun. A relative pronoun introduces a subordinate clause and refers back to some noun or pronoun, which is known as its antecedent. The relative clause itself has an adjectival function, which means it's functioning as an adjective, which means, as you know, adjectives describe or modify a noun. So that's how it's functioning, like an adjective. And it provides descriptive information about the antecedent. Now, in Latin, the forms are varied, so you're going to have to memorize the chart. We'll look at that in just a minute. The genitive and dative singular are similar in pattern to the genitive and dative of the hic, haec, hoc pattern. We'll look at this again and describe it. For right now, let's just look at an example in English of a relative pronoun. Simple sentence: the poet who was from Rome loved the girl. There's your relative clause, who was from Rome. Poet is the antecedent, and who is the relative pronoun. Let's see if we can't break this down a little bit more. Let's look at this sentence here. Same sentence. The poet who was from Rome loved the girl. Again, who was from Rome is the relative clause. Poet is the antecedent. The relative pronoun is who. The poet who was from Rome. So that whole phrase, the relative clause, who was from Rome, is describing the word poet. Let's look at this here. Main sentence is the poet loved the girl. That's the main sentence. Who was from Rome is a subordinate clause. Really, it's a relative clause specifically. But the relative pronoun is who. Poet is the antecedent. But the whole phrase, who was from Rome, describes poet. Which poet was it that loved the girl? It's the one who was from Rome. So that's what a relative pronoun is. It's referring back to the word that it not modifies, but it describes, and that is called its antecedent. And in this case, it's poet. So let's look at the forms of these words in Latin. Here we have the singular and the plural, and this is, you just have to memorize this chart. And if you notice real quickly, the genitive, well, I'll tell you what, before we look at that, let's just look. The nominative you got to memorize: qui, quid, quod, qui in the masculine, qui in the feminine, and quod in the neuter. And if you remember when we did hic, haec, hoc, and allet, allat, allud, all those demonstrative pronouns, instead of going down the column, we go across the row: masculine, feminine, neuter, singular, and then genitive, singular, dative, singular, etc. So when we memorize this will be like this: qui, qui, quod, quis, 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 qui, qui, quem, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo. I want to point out that even though that this is a first and second declension pattern, the genitive and dative are different. They hold to the pattern of hic, haec, hoc, which would normally be in the genitive whis, 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 and then the dative whick, whick, whick. You've got quis, 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 and qui, qui, qui. So that's the pattern. You've got to memorize this. In the plural, we do go down because this holds the regular first and second declension masculine, feminine, neuter plural. Remember the e, orum, is, os, is. Instead of the is, we do have an ibis, so you do have to note that in both dative and ablative plural. So it's qui, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus. In the feminine, it's qui, quorum, quibus, quas, quibus. And in the neuter, qui, quorum, quibus, qui, quibus. Again, the neuter rule, if you remember, whatever is in the nominative has to be in the accusative. So we see that here, as well as in the singular neuter, quod and quo. Those are the same. So again, you've got to go across. When you memorize the singular, it just makes it easier. Qui, qui, quod, quis, 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 qui, 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 quim, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo. And then in the plural, you go down: qui, quorum, quibus, quos, quibus, qui, quorum, quibus, quas, quibus, qui, quorum, quibus, qui, quibus. You do need to note the use of the word qui here is nominative feminine singular, but you also see it in the neuter nominative plural as well as the accusative neuter plural. So you're just going to have to notice that you're going to have to, by context, determine if this is feminine or neuter, nominative neuter, or accusative neuter. You're just going to have to work through that. So that's your relative pronoun chart. You're just going to have to memorize it. And if you learn the hic, haec, hoc ele, ela, lud, luis, all that stuff, demonstrative pronouns. If you've learned those, then this pattern shouldn't be difficult. So let's look at a couple more examples real quick. Here's some rules for the relative pronoun. Number one, the relative pronoun must agree with its antecedent in gender and number. So in other words, in the previous example, the word poet is masculine and was singular, then the word who needs to be a masculine singular form. However, the case of the relative pronoun is going to be determined by the function of that relative pronoun within the subordinate clause. So if that relative pronoun is the subject of the relative clause, then it will be in the nominative case. If, however, it is the direct object in the relative clause, then it will be, of course, in the accusative case. So the case will be determined by how it functions in the clause. Let's look at some examples here. So here is the sentence in Latin that we've been looking at in the English. Poeta qui ex Roma erat, puellum amavit. The poet who was from Rome loved the girl. So this is the Latin version of the English sentence you see at the bottom here. And you've got who was from Rome, of course, is your relative clause. In the Latin, that is qui ex Roma erat. That's the Latin equivalent. It's the relative clause here. There you go. Now, your relative pronoun in the Latin is qui. Relative pronoun in the English is who. And the antecedent for qui, the word that qui is referring to, is poeta. In the English, the word is poet. It's what who is referring to in the English. Now, the word qui here has to agree with its antecedent. And of course, the antecedent is poeta. It has to agree in gender and number. Poeta is masculine, and it is singular. So qui, the relative pronoun here, has to also be masculine and singular. Now, the case, however, there's the word it's referring to, the antecedent. The case, however, is going to be determined by the function of qui in the relative clause. It's functioning as the subject of the linking verb erat. That is the verb here. This is the subject. So because it's the subject of this linking verb, it has to be nominative. Now, incidentally, poeta is also nominative, but that's not the reason why this is nominative. The word qui is nominative because it is the subject of this linking verb. All right. Now, helping us to see this, we're going to diagram the sentence. I think that often helps to see how these words are related. You've got poeta, amavit, puellum. There's your subject, verb, direct object. That's your main sentence. And then in the Latin, the relative clause, qui is the subject, erat is the linking verb, ex Roma is the prepositional phrase of the subordinate clause. So there again is your subject, verb, direct object. Then you've got your subject, linking verb, and prepositional phrase. And the word qui is connected to poeta, and that's why we drew a little line there, and I accidentally hit spacebar, but we'll look at another example here in a minute. All right, so let's try this sentence. Femina quam laudas est sapiens. The woman, comma, whom you are praising, comma, is wise. So femina quam laudas est sapiens. The woman whom you praise, or whom you are praising, is wise. That's the Latin sentence here. So let's check this out here. So again, here's your relative clause, whom you are praising. All right. In the Latin, the relative clause is quam laudas. Right. There's your relative clause. The relative pronoun in Latin is quam, and in English it is whom. The antecedent in Latin is femina, and in English it is the word woman. That's the antecedent. Now, quam has to agree with its antecedent. There we go. There's the antecedent. So the antecedent, femina, is feminine, and it is singular. So quam has to be feminine and singular. The relative pronoun, the form we have to have, is feminine singular. Now, its case is going to be determined by its function in the relative clause. And in this case, quam is serving as the direct object of laudas. You are praising whom? In other words, if you were to substitute the word femina, which is the antecedent of here, woman, you'd substitute here, you are praising the woman is essentially what we're saying. you are praising the woman. So it's the direct object. So consequently, when you look at your chart, you're going to pick the feminine, you're going to pick singular, and you're going to pick accusative, and that is the form quam. So quam, accusative because it's the direct object of ladas, feminine singular because the antecedent femina is feminine singular. The woman whom you are praising is wise. Now let's see how we diagram the sentence. So you've got femina, your subject, est, your linking verb, sapiens is a predicate adjective modifying femina, your relative clause, laudas is the verb, which the s tells you it's second person singular, so we don't really have a subject. It is understood with the verb. Quam is your direct object of the relative clause. And let's see here. Is it going to do it by itself? Oh, it's still going. I think I accidentally hit the button again. But we're going to draw a little line that connects femina to quam. There we go. And that's how you diagram it. So that's the lesson for chapter 17. And you're going to want to read through the lesson and go through this videotape again if you, or the slideshow if you need some more help.